The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. A group of novelists, poets, and playwrights will be giving readings at an event tonight at the Palestine Solidarity Encampment on the grounds of Vancouver Island University. Called the Watermelon Seeds Festival of Literature, the authors include a number of VIU faculty. The Palestine Solidarity Encampment has been installed on VIU's Nanaimo campus since May 1st. It's located on the quad near the library. Three of the authors speaking at tonight's event join me in the CHLY studio.
My name is Paul Watkins. I am a professor of English at VIU. I also occasionally DJ under my DJ alias, DJ Techne. In terms of my academic work, I write about multiculturalism. I write about the intersections between music and literature. And I have my first full book coming out this fall with Wilfrid Laurier Press called Sounding Canaan, Black Canadian Poetry, Music, and Citizenship.
Hi, my name is Sonnet Labbe. I am also a professor at Vancouver Island University. I teach in the English department as well, and I also am in the creative writing department. My specialty is poetry. I've published books of poetry, and my areas of focus are national identity, racialization, gender, gendered experience, and so, yeah, I guess I often have a political lens on my writing about personal experience. So that's what I do.
My name is Kareem Arrawi. I was a professional playwright for some years, working in London, New York, and a number of regional theatres in the US. And now, more recently, I write children's books and novels. I'm not a professor, though I have taught at a number of universities in the US and abroad. My intention is to entertain.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for coming down to the CHLY studio this morning. What is bringing all of you and several other authors to the Palestinian Solidarity Encampment at VIU Wednesday in the evening?
Well, the encampment has been up since May 1st, I believe. And the students who have set up the encampment in the quad are participating in a movement that we've seen in the States, student movement in the States and in Canada, of students protesting the violence and the genocide in Gaza. So that we have that happening here in Nanaimo is pretty momentous, quite historical, and within the community, people might not be aware of what it looks like to have student protests, and student protest is a long tradition. So reading near the encampment in the quad would be a way for anybody to come and participate in the life of education next to these students who are also participating in raising their own voice, and they're using their voice to speak. And so for us to, as authors, to do the same thing nearby seems like a great way to bring the community together in the place and just to show people that it's a peaceful way to exercise one's voice.
And Paul, maybe could you give me more of an idea of what you expect this to actually look like if someone goes down to the university to check it out?
Yeah, so it's an opportunity to hear internationally acclaimed authors reading from their works, as well as the students at the encampment reading from a number of works and poems from Palestinian authors, again, in solidarity with these students. So, this is part of a larger international anti-war student protest movement. So it's an opportunity to hear poetry, to hear words in solidarity with these students exercising the right to free speech.
And Paul, Sonnet, you're both faculty members at VIU. Presumably you've been around the campus, you've seen the encampment. What can you tell me about what you've observed?
Well, one of my colleagues called it a graduate level like practicum in community engagement, or like in organizing. And it really has, it's a beautiful, it's a bunch of tents in the quad, but also where they've got a food tent and a supply tent and, a circle of folding chairs so that people can speak together and hang out. And it's just, it's been this quite fascinating, motivating presence of students messaging. Like they paint signs, they hold little discussion groups, they do activities to let people know that they're there. There's also a sense of it's a protest, right? It's not just a camp, so it's very peaceful. People are just hanging out and learning from one another. But then there's also the awareness that they're not there just to hang out. Like they're there to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that it's incredibly peaceful. Obviously, people are going to have different impressions about some of the slogans and signage. Certainly, there's been some dissonance on campus about that, and we can fully explore that sort of response and the administration's response to that, which prompted a faculty response to that in support of the students. But, the few times that I've been down there just to observe it, I've noticed that students are there and they're doing more than just protesting, but they're also demonstrating sort of community as this active, engaged process, right? That they're modeling in real time, right? They have a schedule for the day. There's activities. I've seen them playing soccer, doing yoga, doing arts and crafts, but also doing, the hard political work as well, right? Of engagement and encouraging people to engage in dialogue, which is something, right? At this point, the administration hasn't done as much of, I think, right, that they could have.
And I want to get into some of maybe the administration's response and the situation there. But first, maybe Kareem, you are not, unlike Sonnet and Paul over here, you're not a faculty member at VIU. Can you tell me what has brought you into this authors reading Wednesday night, and what's your kind of perception of the situation?
Now that's a question. Yes. I was asked by one of the students if I would participate in the reading, and my initial reaction was, well, I don't really know what's going on. So I went down and I spent an afternoon with the students, and it was a pleasant enough afternoon and a pleasant enough experience that I decided I was willing to do the reading, and so volunteered. And
did that, I'm curious as well for everyone here, how did you kind of, presumably you were approached, you found out that this was going on, maybe invited to participate. How did you think about what you were going to read at this event?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, most of the people reading are creative authors, right? They're poets, or they write fiction. Where I'm primarily an academic, although I do some creative performance and, as I mentioned, DJing. So I was asked if I would participate, based on another reading that I did of a poet's work named Saul Williams at an event that Sonnet put together in support of Black History Month. So one of the students saw that and suggested that perhaps I would like to read. So I guess it's an early stage of the book tour, because the book is not coming out into the fall, but I'm planning to take 4 paragraphs from the book and present them in a creative fashion.
I think I might have been invited because the organizer was talking about doing a reading at a picnic table that I was at when he was thinking about doing it. And I was like, yes, you should do that. And he was like, would you read? And I said, yes, of course. So I've organized readings before and participated in many readings. So I guess I was somewhat there for the conversations around organizing. So that's how I got invited. And as far as what I'm going to read, I have one poem that has has Gaza, the word Gaza in it, so I probably will read that, and then the other selections from my poetry. I think I'm going to try to connect to thinking about our responsibility. Like my last book thinks a lot about settler colonial responsibility on Indigenous territory. Like, what does it mean to be a Canadian? How can we be good to one another if we're acknowledging that we are settlers on this territory? That seems relevant.
Midcoast Morning. We'll be right back.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Today on the show, I'm speaking with Paul Watkins, Kareem Al-Rawi, and Sonnet Labay. They're among the authors who will be giving readings tonight as part of an event at the Palestine Solidarity Encampment at Vancouver Island University. Called the Watermelon Seeds Festival of Literature, 6 novelists, poets, and playwrights are scheduled to speak, a number of whom, including Labay and Watkins, are also faculty at the school. Both Paul and Sonnet, you've signed this May 6th open letter that over 100 VIU faculty members have signed, calling, among other things, calling on the school to commit to not using police or private security to remove the encampment. What have you seen or what have you observed on campus maybe since that letter came out and as this has evolved over 20 days?
I think rather than engage in dialogue in the sense, like talking with the students, talking with faculty who have been down there, other than security, I don't think there's been any administrative presence that has actually gone to and open dialogue with the campus directly with the encampment there. So particularly in the letter that the head of security sent to student protesters at the encampment, right? Administration has largely either acted with pointed indifference or extreme measures, right? So building lockdowns, for example, intimidation, threats to bring in law enforcement. Since then, VIU has retracted or walked back a little bit or tried to carefully navigate the situation. Both trying to support students' right to protest, but also to try to figure out where the line around safety is on campus. So we've seen administration try to negotiate that, and recently the president published a letter negotiating some of that stuff. But at this point, we haven't had sustained dialogue.
Yeah, so you mentioned the President, Deborah Saucier, on May 17th put out this statement. In that, she said that she's troubled by the increasing number of concerns, harassment, and other complaints to VIU and WorkSafe BC, and that she's also received reports by some of our campus community who feel the environment does not reflect our common values and our commitment to maintaining an environment free from discrimination, harassment, and hate speech of any kind. As VIU faculty members, what do you make of that, who are, especially as VIU faculty members, I should say, who are participating in this event Wednesday night? What do you make of that, and how do you kind of navigate that?
I had questions about the way that particular letter seemed to focus on having heard concerns, but did not mention the over 120 folks that signed this open letter that took a moment to articulate public support. So for the protests, and as far as I haven't seen any instances of people being harassed by any of the students that are there. I have not witnessed any of that. I have seen security guards follow students, and I have seen security guards refuse to show their ID and refuse to identify themselves. So if some of these conversations in which there's been pushback against being racialized women being followed by security guards is what's being referenced there, then I think there's another lens that we could look at which we could look at that interaction and maybe see it as the other way around, as the students being harassed. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, what is the protest encampment a response to, right? I mean, there's this larger picture, of course, of the ICJ in terms of plausible genocide, undeniable scholasticide, right? As academics, we have the privilege of even going to a university and engaging in dialogue, sometimes with opinions that we don't necessarily fully agree with, right? We might not all agree with the slogans or even some of the tactics used by the student protesters, but the situation in Gaza is dire, right? It's beyond that. People in Gaza are essentially living in apocalyptic conditions without adequate healthcare, food. There's nowhere that people can escape to. And so dialogue seems like a reasonable request, right, to look into how the university invests its money. The Gaza Strip is small. It's some 41 kilometers. That's, Nanaimo to Duncan is 50 kilometers. So we got to imagine 2 million displaced people that are trapped there, right? Some 40,000 dead, 15,000 of those children, many more missing under the rubble. Every hospital and university bombed, people starving because aid can't get in, and yet people worry, right, that the students aren't protesting quite right. So I think, there's a lot more that the administration could do to engage in dialogue and to start that process. And really, I think it's a delicate situation, right? And, I think this should have been happening months and months ago before it got to a point that, students really felt that they had to actually set up encampments to get their message, heard by administration. I would have liked to have seen, back even in October, town halls, right, on campus where people could have their grief heard, right? Because yes, there is a lot of Palestinian grief. There's a lot of Jewish trauma and grief, right? There's a lot of collective grief, and that hasn't been discussed out in the open, right? And so we're at this critical moment, I think.
That statement also did address the idea of dialogue and said that the university has reached out to members of the Students for Palestine Committee, but kind of as a condition of dialogue for the Students of Palestine Committee, reads the statement, the university cannot withdraw its explanation of how its code of conduct or other laws of the land apply, referring to that May 2nd letter from security that mentioned, VIU has the right to enforce the powers granted to it under the BC Trespass Act. What do you make of the fact that maybe it seems like the university says, there's nothing against protesting, students are allowed to protest, we support them in that, and that really on like a legal esoteric level, it's really just about this idea of erecting structures, tents, and kind of these wooden palisades on campus, and that's where it draws the line, and it can't say that we're not going to do anything to enforce those laws.
Okay, I spent a number of years working for various aid and peace-building organizations, including the United Nations. And it seems to me that when the organization that has the power does not take positive steps, then a vacuum is created, and this is what you get. You get then individuals trying to respond to that vacuum in a way that is constructive. So insofar as the university is or may be taking positive steps for engagement, then that's great. But insofar as they're not, it seems to me that they're missing out on an educational opportunity for their students, because when I was a student, whether undergraduate or postgraduate, attending a protest was considered a necessary part of one's education. I'm old enough to remember the tail end of the Vietnam War and demonstrations that I participated in about that war when I was at university in London. And those were huge demonstrations. So I think that things have to be put in perspective. And this is a democracy, and part of our democratic rights is the right to protest. So in that respect, I applaud the students. And insofar as I said, as the university getting engaged with them to discuss and to maybe find some middle ground, I think that would be a positive step.
What is the message you'd want to maybe share with members of the public who aren't in the university community, who might have just, heard about this encampment in passing, who might just be hearing about this encampment right now and not have any firsthand perception of it? What would you want them to know about what you're doing?
One of the things is to invite people to come and be a part of a moment in history, really. That Nanaimo, that this international uprising to focus on Israel and Palestine, to look at what's happening there, and to really have the world's attention on that space is something that we might not have seen if we did not have the committed, engaged students at VIU that we do. So it's momentous for Nanaimo, it's momentous globally, and it's at the same time so personable and so approachable that for me, one of the reasons to do this is to provide a place where people can come and see what's going on, and even for a moment be part of what's happening in the world and what's happening in the city in a peaceful way that really, where we also get to experience what it means to use one's voice to speak up.
I would say come to be entertained and maybe in the process to discover something you didn't know about what's going on.
I like Kareem's emphasis on the entertainment part too, though. It's going to be good vibes.
And what are you hoping comes out of this? If you're looking back maybe a week, a month or so down the road to this event that you took part in, what do you hope people take away from it, and what do you hope the impact is?
If you're talking about the students, I hope that this reinforces an understanding of an aspect of democracy that we don't often see in Canada, which is people protesting for a just cause. From the university's perspective, I hope that it's a learning process for them too, and that they'll understand that really to arrive at any kind of consensus, dialogue has to take place freely, without threats, and with a sense of responsibility on all parts. And for those who are coming for the entertainment value, which I hope people do come for the entertainment value, because really that's going to be a large part of what's on offer, that they have a good time. It makes them think about what's going on in the world, and it makes them think about the kind of world they'd like to be living in, because ultimately that's the world that we're going to bequeath to our children.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And, it's the Watermelon Seeds Lit Festival. Is that the right? Did I get the name right? So if it's just some seeds that get planted, if it's something you can leave with, that you can process in the coming weeks, that perhaps changes your perspective a little bit, even just a little bit, I think, it would have served its purpose, as well as just showing the students, right, that there's support in this community for them.
Also, if those who come have even slightly more of a sense of their own voice mattering in the world, whether it's to entertain or to take a position, whether it's artistically or politically or just within their own community, if one comes away feeling like, oh yeah, I have a voice too, I have a perspective too, that will be something.
Is there anything you feel like we haven't talked about that you would really want to make sure you bring to this conversation?
I think ultimately we are one community, and I think as the recent report that was put out by the International Criminal Court states that a baby that is born in Myanmar, or a baby that is born in Israel, or a baby that is born in Palestine, or one that is born in North America, each one of those babies has a right to a life and has a right to be treated equally. And I think that for me, that is really the lesson that we need to learn if we want to live in a better world, because it isn't a lesson that is being applied really much anywhere in this world. So I know that's a bit of a heavy way of ending, but that's my thought on the subject.
Sonnet, Paul, Kareem, thank you so much for coming down to the studio today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Sonnet Labbe, Kareem Arawi, and Paul Watkins are among the authors giving readings as part of an event tonight at the Palestine Solidarity Encampment at Vancouver Island University. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and RB Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.